So let's look now at the next part of the evaluation system, which is academic growth measures. So here are some considerations, some things that we really looked at when we were trying to design this part of evaluation. This isn't something we've looked at with administrators before, other than saying that, we're going to look at the overall academic performance of your school. But it hasn't really been laid out in a very coherent way. So the first part of the first consideration that we came up with was in state code, it says this, that an educator evaluation program may not use end of level assessment scores in educator evaluation. Now, you know that from teacher evaluation, but what a lot of us don't realize is that that also refers to administrators. If you look at state law and board rule in terms of evaluation, administrators are classed as educators. There is no differentiation between a teacher and an administrator. So therefore, that same prohibition against using end of level assessment scores applies to administrators. We also know, by the way, if you look down to number 3, that Leithwood, and there are many others, this is Ken Leithwood from the University of Ontario, who worked with the province of Ontario on the Ontario Leadership Framework. His research says, and we know this, that an administrator affects student academic growth in indirect ways. A principal does not have direct influence on student academic growth. That's what teachers do. Administrators have indirect effects. So when we started looking at that in the model evaluation handbook, we listed many different ways of measuring a principal's influence on academic growth. So if we look at, let me see if I've still got that open down here. So let me just go away from this for a second and let me see if I've still got the handbook open. Well, I can open it up here really fast. So let me do that. Just a second. It'll be there in just a second. So, okay, so here's the handbook. So if we look at page 7 of this handbook, let's just go down there. And we are talking about academic growth right here. Then here are some examples of some measures that could be used to determine a score, an evaluation score for a principal on student academic growth. So some of those things might be the completion of academic growth goals set by principals in concert with their supervisors, showing the ultimate responsibility for overall academic growth. If a principal wants to use standardized test scores in determining their rating, they're able to do that. The district can't say they have to, but principals can choose to use that. We might want to look at the school improvement plan and what happens and what principal actions are happening from the principal affecting the teachers directly, which then impacts students indirectly. So we might want to look across the year at what's happening with the school improvement plan. We might want to use high leverage practices. For example, choosing leading indicators, things like measures of culture and allocation of resources and physical resources, human capital, and how we assign our teacher talent to students in ways that they benefit students the most. We might want to look at time spent in classrooms, because that has been shown to have an effect. Focusing on continuous improvement cycles with teachers in their evaluations, leadership and attendance at and performance participation in PLCs, all of those things are things that have an indirect effect on student academic growth. So therefore, they could be part of a principal's evaluation in this area of academic growth measures. So how would we look at that? Well, one way to look at that would be in setting some student academic growth goals at the beginning of the year. That would be evidence-based, and they would have no more than 3. They'd be approved and so by or set with the supervisor. There'd be a mid-year conference, at least. Monthly meetings are even better, and then an end-of-year conference and scoring. So here's just a little example of what that might look like. Whoops, I went too far. So here's a little example of what that might look like. So a principal might say, well, one of the things that I want to do, I don't think I'm spending enough time in classrooms, observing teachers and giving feedback to teachers. So my goal is that I want to spend at least 3 more hours per week observing teaching in classrooms than I do in my current practice. My current practice is 2 hours. And I'm going to give feedback to teachers after every visit. So then we would determine that the principal in concert with their supervisor would then determine what would be the rubric for that. What performance would constitute not effective? What would constitute minimally effective? What would constitute effective? What would constitute highly effective? Now, this isn't just something that the principal gets to say, here's what's going to affect this. And this is something that is done between the principal and their supervisor. So not effective in this case might be, I didn't increase the amount of time I spent in the classrooms. So that was not effective. That's not going to help. Minimally effective, well, I maintain my current level of time in classrooms. Effective, well, I achieved my goal. I spent 5 hours in classrooms. I gave some feedback to the teachers on every visit. In highly effective, in order for me as the principal to be rated as highly effective, I think what I need to do, and my supervisor agrees, that in addition to what it says in effective, I'm going to have professional conversations with teachers after every observation that lead to teacher goals for growth. So professional conversations are something that is different than just giving some little bit of feedback to the teachers. It's more like of a post-conference, but it's not as formal and it's not as long. There's a great book that's put out by Charlotte Danielson that's called Talk About Teaching. That is subtitled Professional Conversations that help teachers grow. And that might be something you might want to read with your principals. Or if they choose this kind of a goal, you might say, well, in order for you to really know what professional conversations look like, here's the book that you need to read. If you don't want to go for the whole book, there's also an article in ASCD that was also done by Charlotte Danielson that is called Evaluations that help teachers grow. So that might be something that you want to do. All right. So that's just an example of what that kind of goal might look like. There are many different ways of doing